Mary Christine Brockert, aka Teena Marie, was undoubtedly one of the most important and distinctive artists of her time. Whether she was singing, playing multiple instruments, writing, producing, or all of the above, Lady T was a force in R&B, soul, and funk music. Her music, especially the music of my youth, was often driven by prominent bass lines that were mixed way up front and often as memorable as the vocals that they accompanied. These are my picks for the top 10 bass lines from Teena Marie recordings, along with a little information about who played them and what makes them so great. But first, a disclaimer. My list leans decidedly toward her earlier work, i.e. before 1985. This was a time before the keyboard sound took over and she was using primarily live bass players playing the bass guitar. Detroit bassist Allen McGrier is the most significant bassist in the Teena Marie catalog. When he connected with her in 1979, he had already played with the Dells and Rick James, and he was about to also play with the Jones Girls. Not only did he play bass, he co-wrote songs, he sang, he even had an uncredited role as a co-producer on several of her hits. More than half the bass lines on this list are Allen McGrier lines, and for good reason. Many of her most famous songs are driven by his lines. In music, this is what we call an ostinato. This line stays the same while the harmony on top of it changes. Which creates a little forward motion in the music. It's also funky as heck. It's mostly eighth notes, but as with a lot of great grooves, it is implying almost every 16th note subdivision. This line just slays me. Very melodic, very active. McGrier grew up in Detroit alongside James Jamerson Jr., son of the great Motown bassist James Jamerson, who would eventually become one of his big influences. We can hear Jamerson all over this line. Also, those changes, man, that minor 4 chord just takes you somewhere. This is that kind of boogie bounce from the early 80s that everybody was dancing to. This line drives the song. It's mostly E minor stuff, but what makes the line so special? Articulation. He's so precise with note length and timing. Throw in a little space and maybe a gliss, and the line is, well, magic. Teena Marie's initial success came by way of Rick James, who produced her first album in 1979. Quite naturally, he tapped the members of the Stone City Band to provide some of the musical parts on this album, including the amazing bassist Oscar Alston from Buffalo, New York. In the great tradition of popular music, Oscar Alston's contributions far outweighed any credit that he was ever given. You'll also find him on records by The Temptations, the Mary Jane Girls, and Smokey Robinson. And don't be fooled by the picture. That's Oscar Alston playing bass on Super Freak. The line is classic Stone City funk. Rock meets soul. Eighth note pulse and a little bit of space. And also, dig the overdub bass when the song really gets rolling. It's like a party. After a very high-profile split with Motown in 1982, Teena Marie signed with Epic Records. Her next album, Robbery, featured a who's who of studio musicians, including Patrice Rushen, J.R. Robinson, and Nathan East. This track features one of my all-time favorite rhythm sections in Anthony Jackson on bass and Steve Ferrone on drums. Chaka Khan was in the middle of making a series of solo albums that featured that exact rhythm section, and it's pretty cool to hear Teena Marie kind of borrow that sound. This is everything we expect from AJ on bass. Evenness of all notes, articulate, perfectly in time. Harder to play than you think.
Everybody get up!
This was her biggest hit on Motown and one of her most recognizable songs. Again, this is driven by a very upfront Allen McGrier bass line, and it was played, like most of his lines, on a Music Man bass. Like Louis Johnson before him and Flea after him, the tone of the Music Man bass becomes an essential part of his voice on these recordings. Also, syncopation. He is playing highly syncopated lines with such ease. Speaking of syncopation, this line right here is killing. Another ostinato type groove, and if you listen really hard, you can hear that he's favoring the bridge pickup a little more, which gives it that bite. Clever musical technique. He's starting the line on the 5th of G minor, which is a D, and then moving down that scale and ending on the root. Nice. This was the first track on her third album. I mean, come on, the record started like this with the bass. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Articulation. He's leaving so much space between the notes that we really feel the beat. It becomes percussive and articulate. And it's all over one chord, B minor. Why don't more people know about Allen McGrier? Now, this one doesn't come from a Teena Marie record, although she did produce it and sing on it. It was, in fact, written by bassist Allen McGrier and played by Ozone bassist Charles Glenn Jr. Nashville bassist Charles Glenn recorded 5 albums with Ozone, in addition to playing with Billy Preston, DeBarge, and Luther Vandross. He also later spent decades as the bassist for pianist Little Richard. This bass line is, in my humble opinion, one of the undiscovered gems of slapping bass. I think we hear Marcus Miller come from this same concept. More thumps than plucks, and space. This is a straight up funk jam in the key of E, every bass player's proving ground. It is a killing line that I think owes more than a little influence to the late great Louis Johnson. It sounds like a busy track, but with some well-placed pats on the fingerboard from the left hand and some guitar parts that are playing very close to the bass range, it sounds busier than it actually is. Very Lewis-esque. I found myself raising my action a bit and thumping really hard with my right hand to get that punch out of the E string like Louis Johnson does. The whole line is an exercise in focus and rhythm. So that's my list, and I'm sticking to it. What's your favorite Teena Marie bass line? Let me know in the comments. Lady T left us way too soon in 2010 at the age of 54. I was lucky enough to grow up when most of these songs were being played on the radio every day. Whether you know it or not, songs like these end up becoming a part of who you are. I'm thankful I was able to hear this music, and even more thankful that I know the names today that I should know. Charles Glenn Jr., Oscar Alston, and Allen McGrier, y'all. Allen McGrier. Thank you all.